Yeah, my name is Daniel Zetah. Like you said, I'm a regenerative farmer in Hutchinson, Minnesota. And yeah, just trying to do my little part to make the world a better place. Well, I was born on this farm that I'm currently picking up firewood on. I was brought up Christian in the Methodist church. My parents were very, very conventional folks. It's a very, very conventional community, and I always felt a little bit like an outsider, even when I was a kid. So when I finished school, went to school for economics and business, I decided to move out of the state just to see something different, and went to Colorado, bought and sold classic cars for a couple of years till 9/11 happened, and I'd always felt weird about American culture before that, and how we just seemed to be so scared of each other. And after 9/11, watching people react to that in an even more pronounced fear, in a more pronounced fear capacity, where everybody is looking at each other and wondering if they were the next terrorist, I decided to leave the country, and I ended up going to Australia just because I had a friend who had a brother that lived there and said that I could crash at his place for a while. So I ended up going there, ended up marrying a lady over there, and stayed there for a dozen years until actually Fukushima, the meltdown at Fukushima happened. I was living in a remote village up in the mountains of Tasmania, and realized that there is no place I can go to hide from this culture. It just seems like everywhere I've been in the world, everybody's clamoring to try to be like Americans, seeing only what they see on the media, and it being portrayed as this amazing thing, but they don't see all of the negatives, all the downsides to it. And I realized that there's only one way that I can try to help stave off collapse of basically the entire ecosystem of the world, along with the extinction of humans and darn near every other life form on Earth, is by going back into the belly of the beast, which I deem to be the American Midwestern rural culture, and try to change it from the inside. So I came back here and ended up meeting Stephanie in North Carolina when I was just trying to find a partner. I ended up looking online for ages, trying to find somebody with similar values, because there's nobody with similar values in my hometown. Met her in North Carolina, and we decided to move back to my family farm and give it a go. So we've been here for, 5 years now together, and we're trying to make it happen. We're replanting the ecology that was once here. We're growing food for ourselves and for our community, and we are educating kids and adults alike, trying to teach them how to be resilient and how to be self-sufficient, how to be more human, with connecting to the land and connecting to themselves in the process. The land that I'm standing on was stewarded originally by the Sioux Indians, Lakota Indians here in south central Minnesota, and a lot of it where I'm standing right now was an oak savanna tall grass prairie, which is the only way to have that level of succession ecologically, is to be managed by humans. So I'm just basically trying to continue what they had started probably 10,000 years ago. And my family came along in 1966 and bought the land from the Detman family, who were the first white people to, I guess you could say, steward the land after it was stolen from the Native Americans. And so, yeah, I've grown up here. Even though I was gone for 15 plus years, even when I was on the other side of the world, I could close my eyes anytime I wanted, and I could imagine myself standing at any point on this 96 acres just because I know it so intimately. So it's difficult to explain to somebody that didn't grow up on land what kind of connection you feel emotionally and spiritually to a piece of soil, piece of the earth. But there it is. I do feel that level of connection, and I'm standing out in the woods right now collecting firewood from a red elm tree that I just cut down yesterday. Yeah, red elms. Man, I love these trees. They smell so beautifully. They burn so well. Yeah, I'm very sad to see a lot of them being. This is probably one of the last ones in the woods because of Dutch elm disease that came along in the 70s and killed 98% of the red elms in this area. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about the connection to the land other than that.
Thank you for that, Dan. I think that's a mighty great answer. I'm also interested if you can talk a little bit about farming and specifically what brought you into farming.
Well, I guess what brought me into farming was being born on a farm, obviously. But I think what brought me back to farming, probably more to the point, is after living, I tried urban living. I lived on a boat in Hobart, Tasmania for a couple of years. I lived in a couple of smaller cities in Tasmania. Really, the biggest city I ever lived in was probably Hobart, which is about 250,000 people. So some would argue that it's just a big town, but I became keenly aware of our ecological and social ecological plight as a species back probably around 2005, 2008, somewhere around there. And I decided to really try to do something about it. And I really, at first, thought it was just an information problem. I thought, well, I grew up without understanding or knowing about any of this stuff, and somebody told me, and suddenly I'm keenly aware and really passionate about it. So obviously, if I inform other people the same way, that they would become keenly passionate about it as well, and we can fix this really quickly. But after a couple of years of trying to desperately explain what is going on on Earth rather than just their own lives and the system that we unconsciously have built as humans, it just seemed like that really wasn't working. So I ended up as a stint of 3 years of being an environmental activist. I was on an anti-whaling ship called the Steve Irwin with the Sea Shepherd organization, which is a radical, it was spawned out of Greenpeace back in the 70s, and they were a bit more radical, where they actually rammed harpoon ships and tried to stop whaling. And I thought that would be neat, and it's a good cause, but at the same time, every type of activism I ever tried, it was always fighting against something. It was always trying to stop something that people didn't like, rather than trying to rebuild a system that actually worked for people and for the earth. And it just seemed negative, really, and reactive. And I feel like if we're going to ever get on top of our situation and our toxic relationship with the earth as humans, we need to address it at the core, which is how do we rebuild a relationship with the earth? How do we change that story, that toxic cultural story that we were taught, and we're totally unconscious of the fact that humans are above and separate from every other being, every other life form on earth? That story from Genesis of the Bible, which is what drives the majority of this, that says that go forth, be fruitful and multiply, and have dominion over everything that walks, flies, and slithers on the earth. I'm paraphrasing, but that was probably one of the worst things that humans ever brought upon this earth, was that story, because it really just told people that whatever we did to the earth, it didn't matter because it was all here for us. And I just realized that there's the only way to change our relationship was to help people find that relationship, that intimate connection with the earth. And I figured going back to the farm and just growing food in an ecologically honest way and inspiring people to want to connect with where their food is grown and what happens to the planet as a byproduct is a good place to start. It's pretty much the only thing that I could think of on this planet that I am completely capable of, completely skilled up for, and it was probably the easiest point of intervention to try to help our plight. So that's what got me back into farming.
What is the best way forward? What do you want other people to know about regenerative agriculture? Is it that you want other farmers to sort of understand how this works, or are you more interested in working with people to get, what's sort of something you wish for?
Yeah, I don't focus on other farmers simply because most other farmers have a pretty poor relationship with the land as well, and they'll do whatever the economic system tells them to do to their land. So I feel like the most important thing I can do is show consumers what power they have and what kind of world they vote for every time they buy something. Ultimately, do I believe that cities and urban living is a sustainable way for humans to be? No, I don't. I just kind of feel like civilization in general, the way that we have it set up, is unsustainable, and the fact that everybody that lives in a city, the way that cities are designed is that they're basically more humans per square mile than what that capacity of that land has to meet the needs of those humans. So you have to be pulling resources in from further and further afield. And at some point, the humans that are in that city have no relationship to what is sustaining their lives. And that level of disconnect drives that level of misunderstanding and complacency that is destroying the planet, because most people that are buying anything that they need in a city, they have no idea what is going on in the production of those things that they need. So I guess I'm here to try to explain to people that to start thinking for the first time in their lives of where these things come from. Where does their food come from? Where do their clothes come from? Where, right down to like what are the implications of the technologies that they use? It's a systems level problem, and there is no one particular way to look at it, because everything is interconnected. Just like in nature, everything in nature is interconnected. So too are our problems as humans that we face, because we are intimately connected with nature. So I guess I want people to start thinking on a systems level, to understand what their part of this is, and that they have power as an individual. I feel like most of our problems as well, even when people do recognize them and want to do something about it, they tend to feel disempowered and think, well, I need a politician to fix this. I need scientists to fix this. I need somebody else to fix this. But nobody's actually realizing that they individually hold the key. I guess I see culture as a very different thing as well. Like, most people see culture as just something that is, and that it is. I think a lot of them recognize that culture shifts, but they don't know what drives it. And to me, it seems pretty obvious that culture is built and is continuously being built and changed by millions and millions and millions of individual decisions and actions on a daily basis by all of us. And if enough of us just took our power back and realized how much power we had as individuals, instead of just saying, well, I voted for so and so, or I bought an electric car so I can pat myself in the back and not really do anything else, it's just so self-limiting and so self-defeating that I want to help inspire people to do something different and realize what their power is and how to utilize it. And there is no feeling of power more grounding and exciting to actually realize that you, as an individual, can meet your own needs. You can grow your own food. You can collect your own rainwater. You can make your own clothes. You can make your own tools. Like, we've done this for 60, 70,000 years as human beings, 100,000 years. Even before that, when we were Neanderthals. I mean, God, we've been doing this ever since we evolved, from whatever you want to think. We've been taking care of ourselves right up until the last 10 generations. And it's just gotten exponentially worse with every generation, to the point that this latest generation, I fear for their souls. Most of them don't know how to do anything for themselves other than to press buttons on a screen, and they've never known the joy of eating a tomato that they grew. They've never known the joy of doing anything for themselves and having that feeling of pride and connection to the spirit or to God or to whatever you want to call that connects us to the earth. And it's just sad, because that, to me, is one of the most amazing feelings that a human can ever feel, is meeting their own needs or their family's needs or even their community's needs through their own skill and hard work and effort. And I truly believe that that's one of the reasons why we have such a pandemic of fear and depression in our culture, is that we just don't. We know that deep down that what we're doing is not good for us or the planet, and we don't know how to change it, because we don't even know where to start. We don't even know how to recognize what is missing, even. But humans are meant to have this relationship with each other and with the land and their bodies and the food that they consume, and you take all that away, and we're just, to me, we're just basically talking heads in a floating meat suit.
How does New Story Farm compare to the other farms in your area?
Well, firstly, I would probably like to say that the reason why New Story Farm is different in one aspect, just financially, is that I inherited this farm. Like, Stephanie and I inherited this farm, and so we have very little overhead. And so we have the luxury of being able to do things differently that a lot of farmers don't have. And I want to recognize that. It's really difficult to do anything that is innovative or different in this system that basically it incentivizes doing badly by the earth. Like, the way our our ag policy is set up, our farm policies are just horrendous. They hyper incentivize destructive practices and short-term thinking. And yeah, I feel like when I talk to what I call big ag farmers that basically just grow commodity crops as corn and soybeans, they know what they're doing is bad. They know what they're doing is really not good for the earth, not good for their land, not good for their children, but they don't see a way out because that's where the money is. And that's the reason why that's where the money is that our government and I suppose ag industry in itself, lobbying to the government, has set up the policies and regulations that make it so there's an economic incentive to grow that kind of food or that kind of crop. But I guess anyone can make different decisions if they cared enough about it. Personally, I guess I would rather be destitute and impoverished in the form of money and in material belongings, as long as I still had the ability to stay on the land and pay the taxes to be here. And that's kind of what we're doing. We make very little money on the farm with our farming practices, mostly because there's not enough consumers that actually value what we're doing and how we're doing it and the quality food that we grow, because most people value quantity over quality. They value their phones or their cars or their homes or their clothes over the food that they put in their mouths or their children's bodies. And that's probably my biggest frustration in it, is that it's a cultural problem. It's a values problem. We as a culture value those shiny technology bits more than we value real connection and real things that we need and what the earth needs. And it's frustrating because everything could change if enough people realize that and change. Man, Val, I digress. I get so off track with you asking this one question and me having to. There's nobody steering me, and when I'm not getting steered, I feel like I kind of just run away on tangents. Can you bring me back into orbit?
I can definitely bring you back into orbit, but Dan, I think that these are tangents that are really, I invite them. They're wonderful. I want to ask you something that you brought up on your so-called tangent. Why do you think that this culture that we live in values quantity and values things like the ones you mentioned? Like, why do you think that we sort of are in this situation where most people aren't like you and they don't, value sort of sustaining themselves? Why?
Because we're just animals. I don't know if I can swear on this, but there's a great piece in a song by God, what's his name? Australian artist, funny guy. Anyway, one of his parts says, "We're just fucking monkeys in shoes," and we are. We're really just monkeys. Our brains haven't changed much in the last million years, and because we're just like every other animal. I'm standing in one of our woods. We have 2 woods here on the farm. We probably got about 25 acres of woods. And there are plenty of deer here. And I use deer as a great example when people ask me this kind of question. If you feed deer corn in one spot, they're going to basically forsake every other food that they have evolved to eat, and they'll just go to that corn because it's easy. They're just like every other species of being on this planet. We are like water. We flow in the path of least resistance. And so if there is a readily available, easy food source, we are going to take it. We're going to take advantage of that. And I guess because we're a bit short-sighted, just like every other species as well, we don't really see, hey, if we just eat corn over the next, couple generations, our kids are going to forget how to find acorns and roots and whatever other things that deer eat in the forest. And then if that corn supply ever dries up, we're all going to die. They don't think like that. Nobody does. No species on Earth thinks like that. So, unfortunately, we're just a product of our own demise, and the fact that I don't know if it's civilization. You could go back to civilization and say the moment that we started putting too many people in one geographical area that caused that level of disconnect from where their sustenance came from, that then by happenstance after that, we created this crazy economic system that made this currency that was basically just paper that we agreed upon as individuals and as a society that had some kind of value in the real world. And as soon as we started doing that, you just have more and more intangibles stacked on top of each other, where you get further and further disconnected from reality. And I don't know exactly how it all started, but I do know that where it's going to end is not good. Like I tell farmers around here that tell me that they have to farm the way they do because they have to feed the world. They have this ethical or moral responsibility to feed the world, which is a story that the big agribusinesses push on them, because then the ends justify the means. But like I tell them all the time, if you're trying desperately to feed an exponentially increasing population with a degrading model of agriculture, where every year your ability to grow food gets less and less because of the way you're doing it, like at some stage that's a divergent equation, and at some stage that's going to end in tears. That's going to end possibly in the deaths of billions of people. This is a very unpopular thing to say, but there's 8 billion people on this planet for a reason, and the reason being is that we came up with this really short-sighted, flash-in-the-pan way of growing calories really, really cheap, basically using fossil fuels that one could argue they're just concentrated ancient sunlight. For millions of years, this species and every species has just lived on what sunlight struck the earth in that solar year. And suddenly we're able to use millions of stored sunlight years in 1 year, growing this huge amount of nutritionally empty calories, but it still keeps people alive. And what does every species on Earth do when there's a surplus of food? They breed. And we just breed like it's our job, and just like every other species does. I'm not saying that we're wrong in doing that. There's this biological imperative to do so, but at the same time, every other species on Earth, I don't know if they know it or not, but they have to live by it because they haven't figured out how to get around it. Is that there's always this connection, there's always this feedback where they have to live within. And over time, if they overextend their population in relation to their resources, then the world or nature or whatever you want to call it, God makes the decision to thin the herd. And I'm afraid that's what humans are hurtling towards, because we're not good at long-term thinking. We're not good at systems thinking, it seems. And until we can figure out how to be better at that, it just seems like we're going to continue hurtling towards some pretty bad stuff. coming our way from our own doing.
What are we hurtling towards? Like, what is the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario that I see is that if we don't stop what we're doing and change directions, not only are we going to kill every human on the planet because we're so radically changing our environment. Like we evolved just like every other being to live in a certain level of parameter with atmospheric gases and temperatures, and outside of those parameters we can't exist. And we're very quickly going towards a world that we as humans have never lived in. And I don't know how we would survive that. I'm sure some of us probably would if it didn't get too bad. But if you research or look into climate change, not even that much, you'll realize that there's a lot of positive feedback loops that once, like permafrost melting, is a perfect example. Like permafrost is basically locked up carbon that has been frozen in the northern regions of the earth for millions of years. And now, because the temperatures are rising, that methane, it's not carbon, it's methane from rotting vegetation millions of years ago, and that methane is being released, and that methane is a global warming gas that is 70 times more of a global warming gas than carbon dioxide is. And so it amplifies the climate change, and suddenly it gets warmer and it releases more methane, and this is just one of many positive feedback loops that are coming online very quickly. And once again, I feel like one of our main problems as a human is that we have a real hard time understanding the exponential equation. I think even if like half of people could understand or grapple with that concept of the exponential equation, we wouldn't be in this situation near to the same extent. And the exponential equation basically is just 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 4 is 16, and it's the doubling effect. So the things aren't linear. And so it seems like everything is fairly static in the short term, because the way we see things is pretty short. But it's not. It's actually getting rapidly worse. And yeah, I guess absolute worst case scenario I see is that we change the parameters of our environment, of our atmosphere, so badly that it runs away, and really there's very few life forms that have evolved up to this point that will be able to handle that level of change that quickly, and we'll have a mass extinction event on our hands. I mean, one silver lining to it all is that I do believe in the Earth's ability to heal itself, and as soon as whether we stop voluntarily or whether we all die, at some stage the Earth will start healing herself, and there will be other life forms that will evolve and take our place. But that's pretty empty consolation to having all that we know and all that we've ever known go away by our own hands.
Dan, can you tell me the first time that you sort of came to all of these realizations that we're talking about now? Like, do you remember a point in your life when you sort of came to all of these things, or do you feel like it's always been inside you? Or
I mean, I guess I've always questioned things. I developed what I've kind of coined as the black sheep gene theory, which goes along these lines. If you imagine a small village of human beings, let's just say there was 150 people, which is probably what we evolved to be in groups of, in tribes of, say 50,000 years ago, and we're all living in a valley under the shadow of this mountain. And just imagine one scenario that every single 150 person member of this tribe looks at that mountain and says, boy, that's scary. I don't want to go over there. And nobody ever left. Nobody ever came. It was just static. Eventually, that group of 150 people would breed themselves out of existence because the gene pool would become shallower and shallower and shallower. And so somebody at some point has to leave. But there can't be too many people that leave because it would tear the fabric of that society apart. There'd be too much dynamism in it. So there has to be this small percentage of people that look at the mountain and wonder what's over on the other side, and are able to withstand the peer pressure of the other 99% or plus, saying you can't go over there. There's demons, there's devils, there's all these horrible monsters. And they ended up going anyway, and they go over the mountain, and what they find is another group of people living on the other side in another valley, and they end up finding a mate and having kids, and that's what gives us and has given us this diversity in genes over the last, however long we've been around on this planet. And it works the same with every species on Earth because we're just another animal. I guess I've always felt like I was a black sheep. I questioned my upbringing. A lot of the stories I questioned. I certainly questioned Christianity, being brought up in that. I remember when I think I was about 12, I was in Sunday school, and they told us the story of Noah's Ark, and I raised my hand and asked, so hold on, you want me to believe that there was enough water on the earth to cover Mount Everest? They managed to get 2 of every single species, like millions of species, onto this one boat, and that every single human being died except for Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives, and all of us are related then from those same people. And instead of answering my questions and understanding why I had those kind of questions, they kicked me out of Sunday school. And I'm kind of glad they did, because I didn't really want to go back. And yeah, unfortunately at that point I was left with the decision of, well, I'm either A, smarter than every other human being on the planet, because as far as I was concerned when I was 12 years old living in Hutchinson, Minnesota, that every other person believed wholeheartedly in that story and that I was the only one that's ever questioned it, or I was possessed by the devil. And I lived with those 2 realities up until I went to college and met other people that had also questioned those stories. And then I started feeling a little bit better about myself, but I guess I just kind of rambled along life, questioning things. I even got a tattoo questioned on my arm because I was actually afraid in my mid-20s that this was a phase. I looked around and thought, well, what if everybody has gone through this phase? They've all asked these hard questions about the world and reality, and then at some stage they just got sick of it, and they just ended up going back and doing what everybody else does because it just was hard. So I ended up getting a tattoo on my arm, thinking that I didn't want to forget how to keep asking questions. I wanted to remind myself throughout life that I wanted to continue to question not only the stories around me, but also myself, my own reality. So, but as far as like environmentalism, I remember distinctly, I was working for the Launceston City Council in Tasmania, and one of my workmates' husband was there, Brett, and he started talking to me about stuff, and we got into some pretty deep philosophical and environmental discussions, and he was probably one of the most instrumental people in my life as far as like how I viewed the world, because he didn't pull any punches. He just said, what are you doing? Do you understand these ideas? And then I ended up going to their house, and they were living unlike anybody I'd ever known. They built their own small house of probably 500 square feet, if that. They built it with their own hands. They bought a piece of land, built their house. They were growing food. It was just a really beautiful, simple life, and they were both really happy. And just seeing that and experiencing that and their friendship really changed the way I viewed the world and made me realize that the answers weren't in more cities or more ideas intellectually or more specialization where everybody learns a particular part of the puzzle pieces of knowledge on how the world works. I realized from him especially that there is value in being a generalist, because I felt like growing up on a farm, I was not really good at anything. I was proficient at a lot of things. I'm a good mechanic. I'm a good welder. I'm a good builder. I can do plumbing. I can do electrical. I can help a calf be born. I can plant seeds. I can grow food. I can do a lot of things. I'm not really good at any of them. And then you go out in the world and everybody is basically telling you from the point of leaving high school that you have to choose one particular sliver of knowledge to learn and get really, really good at, so then you can make a lot of money and you can buy everything you need. It was just really disempowering, and I always felt like I didn't belong in that. And I felt like an imposter out in that world. And he gave me permission, basically, to see that I had value in how I was, as a jack of all trades and a master of none.
Dan, can you tell me what the tattoo says?
It's just a question mark.
That's pretty neat. Do you feel like as you got older, did the fear of you no longer asking questions go away? Did you realize that you were always going to ask questions?
I just turned 45 a few days ago, and it hasn't diminished at all. So yeah, I guess I no longer live in fear that this is a temporary level of being. So.
Well, happy belated birthday, Dan.
Thank you.
I want to sort of bring you back to regenerative agriculture, specifically because I feel like a lot of people don't even know what it is. But can you tell me, what is the role of regenerative agriculture for when it comes to everything we've talked about? Like, what is the role that it plays in sustaining the earth from getting to this, like, the bad stuff, the worst case scenario?
Sure. Okay. So just to quickly tie what I've been talking about together with regenerative agriculture, I feel like regenerative agriculture is a stepping stone. If we're going to continue on with this grand experiment called civilization, where we insist on specialization and housing people in more and more concentrated ways, and we're going to expect a smaller percentage of humans to grow all of the food for those people, whether or not the population is growing, I guess it really doesn't matter at this stage. If we're going to do that, which I'm not saying that we should, but it feels like unless we're able to talk about this as a society, we're going to, as a matter of course, because we can't imagine anything else or how we would organize ourselves as a society. So if that is a foregone conclusion, that a small proportion of the population is going to grow all the food, we need to start doing that in a way that understands systems level thinking. We need to do that in a way that is going to, instead of degrading the land base that we're growing food on, we're actually upgrading it. We're making it better every year. So every year that I grow food on this farm in a way that is in line with the ecology that was here and wants to be here, every year that I do that in a way that is in line with that, it actually gets better. Like, my capacity to grow more calories the following year increases. And so that's what it, by definition, regenerative, because it is making things better. Like the word sustainable, which has been so overused by urban people and people in general for the last 10, 20 years, which almost makes me want to vomit in my mouth when I hear it or say it. It really is just so self-limiting, because sustainable means that you're not making things worse and you're not making things better. And if we've already made our environment and our situation so horribly bad, once you actually understand ecology and you look around, you realize that it's literally on death's door. And then the word sustainable has virtually no meaning, because there's no way that we're going to survive if we just sustain the level of damage that we've incurred or created on this planet. We have to figure out how to reverse it. We have to figure out how to make things better. And the only way, the best way that I can see or have learned how to do that up to this point is through regenerative agriculture. And regenerative agriculture is really just working with natural systems, working with soil biology instead of trying to supplant soil biology by replacing all of those billions and billions of living beings in the soil with some chemical fertilizer that's created through the Haber-Bosch principle and using, liquid petroleum. Like, that's how the majority of calories for human beings is grown right now. And when you use synthetic fertilizer on soil, it literally kills the majority of life in the soil. And anybody that's ever studied anything about soil, they say that there's more living beings, bacteria and other little protozoan beings in every teaspoon of soil than there is stars in the galaxy. So there's a lot of critters that we're killing when we're growing food that way. Whereas what we're doing, every year it gets better. Another great example is that before white people came along to this farm that I'm standing on and plowed up the tallgrass prairie, the average soil organic matter in this area was about 12 to 15%. And the soil organic matter is basically just carbon. And that carbon is molecularly, it's got a lot of edges. So it holds water and it holds nutrients that the plants need. So that carbon was locked up in the soil for millions of years. And after my ancestors came here and tilled that soil up the first time, the average soil organic matter percentage in this area right now is less than 2%. And so you take like a 10 plus percentage drop in soil organic matter, and you extrapolate that over millions and millions and millions of acres that are under cultivation in that same degenerative manner, and you really realize how much we've changed this environment, and how, if you believe in climate change, which is still just gobsmacking that there's so many people around me that still think that it doesn't exist. But if you believe in it, you realize that the amount of carbon that we've released through our farming practices almost dwarfs the amount of carbon that we've released by driving cars around for the last 100 years. And you then, but then you also realize by seeing that we have power in this. We can actually change this quite quickly if we changed our values and we changed where we put our money, where we as consumers actually put our resources towards, then our government would shift too, because the government basically does what people want as long as we still live in the system that we purport to live in. So if enough people actually change the values and change the way they put their energy out into the world, it could change really quickly. Like hypothetically, if we, like, let's just say hypothetically that 85% of Americans said, oh my God, this is really important, and they changed what they bought, and they suddenly were trying to buy everything from local regenerative farmers like me, well, yeah, there'd be a really huge bottleneck, and the cost of that food would go up, and the amount of people trying to get land would go up. You know, the amount of young people that would trying to get onto land. But like, there's so many different things at play. Like, if you right now, the land prices are super high because of the way our system is set up, and if that system changed through our actions and values, all the parameters would shift. And so the land prices, maybe they'd go up, maybe they'd go down, maybe they'd stay the same, but there'd be certainly a huge disincentive to grow food the way we've been growing it, and there'd be this huge economic incentive to grow food in a regenerative manner.
In your vision of a sort of dream world, what do consumers do differently than now? What does it look like to you?
So my vision of a dream world is not really so much as what consumers buy. My vision of a dream future is where more and more people don't want to live in a city. More and more people realize that they should be having less children, and we should be getting on top of our population problem. More and more people are wanting to live in smaller, towns and in rural areas, and the people that do want to continue living in the city, there's nothing wrong with that. If they do, that they're going to change their practices, they're going to change the way they buy things, they're going to change the way that they interact with the areas that are producing things for them. They're going to actually care enough where they're going to go and visit farms, and they're going to want to know where the food that they're growing is grown and how it's grown. And they're going to make relationships with small farmers like us. And that's already happening. We already have a lot of customers that have become friends that live in Minneapolis, and they sought us out because of our farming practices, and a lot of them have come to the farm and seen how we do things differently, and they care more and more every time they come out and learn more about this stuff. But ultimately, I would like to see a world that actually looks a lot like the agricultural communities from, say, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where there was millions of small farms dotted across the landscape, and there was entire communities that were built around farming in a way that wasn't as destructive, at least. Like, I'm not going to say that agriculture, ever since its inception of tilling the soil and planting annual crops, has ever been really good for the soil. And that's a whole nother discussion that we can get to when I finish this train of thought. Annual agriculture versus perennial agriculture. But I would love to see, like, I'm sitting here on a little knoll up in the woods, and I can look out and I can see 4 farms from my vantage point, and every single one of them was a small, diversified family farm up until the last 5 to 10 years. And after those farmers died off, all that happens to every single one of them was that their kids no longer wanted to farm. They all lived in town. They had no interest in the land, and so they just rented out to big agriculture. And I even know the farmer that is renting that land. He runs probably 8,000 acres in this area. And to him, he has no real connection to the land. He doesn't know 1 acre from the other. They're just numbers to him. There's no intimate connection at all anymore, because you can't really intimately know that much. It's like trying to intimately have 10,000 friends. You just can't. We just not built that way. But I'm looking at the real world consequences of where we have put all of our energy in the last few generations, and what it's done to this local landscape, the local farms, the local communities. Like there was, I can think of probably 10 small farming communities in a 20-mile radius of where I'm standing, and they all had thriving local economies. There was a whole bunch of locally owned businesses. People made stuff that people needed, and we actually got along really well doing the things that we needed to do. And then over time, as more and more and more people have decided that they want cheap and convenient over local and quality, whenever we've chosen that, unconsciously or consciously, we have created a different world. And now all of those small towns, they're just shells. There's a whole bunch of empty buildings on main streets. All the main streets are pretty much dead. There's just no industry anymore. There's hardly anybody that makes anything anymore. We're basically just relegated to being a whole bunch of rural towns that are very similar in a way to city dwellers, and the fact that we rely completely on a system for the things that we need as human beings. And that's just sad, because the capacity is there. Like even the skill. I mean, that's another tangent I could get off on very, very easily, how the generational knowledge chain that goes back since our beginnings on this planet has literally been severed in the last few generations, because all of the skills that we had and that we earned through a whole bunch of just a lot of hard work and a lot of error and trial and error and trying to figure out how to do things on this planet, it's all been lost, just like languages have been lost, just because we figured that one thing is easier and one thing is more efficient, and so we just turn our back and we turn towards globalization and convenience and ease, and we end up having very little control anymore. We basically trade our sovereignty for cheap and convenient, and the result is not good on any level. I guess the problem is that I feel like what you're trying to do, Val, is so important. Trying to tell a story, an alternative story to the mainstream reality of disconnection and superiority of humans, and this it's almost like we're hurtling towards this future that none of us feel really empowered about, but we feel like we have no control over. And have you ever noticed how so many movies in the last 5 to 10 years, they're like zombie movies or post-apocalyptic movies? A friend of mine asked me that a few years back. He said, if I asked you to name 5 post-apocalyptic movies, I bet you could rattle off 5 really quickly, or even 5 post-apocalyptic novels. But if I asked you to name 5 utopic novels or movies, you'd be really hard pressed. And he was right. I've been thinking about that ever since. And as human beings, if we lack the capacity to imagine a future where we don't end up destroying the planet and killing ourselves, that's what we're going to get. Because we are story-based beings. That is how we got to where we are right now. Whether we're conscious of those power of those stories, those cultural stories or not, they still basically drive everything we do as human beings. And one of my favorite books that I've ever read, one of the most influential books that I've ever read, is Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And that book is just trying to explain to people that those stories firstly exist, because so many of them, it's kind of like asking a fish to describe water. Our reality has been built since the time that we were born, and we're so affixed to that reality that we have no understanding of how that reality came to be. We have no real understanding of where those stories came from that created that reality, or the fact that stories created that reality in the first place. But once you recognize that our reality has indeed been created by the stories that our ancestors passed down to us, you realize that some of those stories may or may not actually be in our best interest. They may or may not be working in the current context of the world that we live in now. And we need to have the humility and the foresight to actually look back at some of those stories and ask ourselves, are these serving us as human beings? Are they serving us as a society, as a culture? And if not, we need to say, well, what are we going to replace those stories with? Because if you get rid of a story, you have to replace it with something else, because the fact is that humans are story-based, and we're never going to be anything other than that. Like, that's in our DNA. And so if you're going to replace a story that isn't working, you have to replace it with a story that at least has the chance of working, at least has a chance of doing something good. And right now, I just feel like the vast majority of human beings don't understand even that those stories are a thing. And they certainly don't understand that they have any power over them. They feel like it is just as much of a foregone conclusion as the air we breathe. But it's not. They are just stories, and they were made up by people, just like us. And so if we change the stories and start telling different stories, we will have that ripple effect going into the future that, you know, if it's the right story, people might be telling a similar story in 1,000 years. But if we continue going on the stories that we've been going on, I can almost guarantee that there won't be anybody retelling that story with even in 100 years.
Yeah, Dan, I really like the conversation about stories. I just think that that's so important, and I keep thinking about it, which is why I asked you that last question about sort of this like ideal world, because I think that so many people have such a hard time sort of even just imagining something different than what the dominant culture looks like. Yeah. So I think it's really important. I think that what you hit on is really important. And I think my last question for you for this session of oral history would probably be, can you explain what the ecology is that you're on right now? What does it want to be? Like, you sort of said this, and I think it's so powerful, and I think that most people can't imagine it without you describing it. But can you sort of describe that to me? What is the land? What did it used to look like before white man came?
That's a great question. I think I have to just back up one step, though, because I don't know who is going to be hearing this. I don't know who is going to be reading it. I don't know, I don't know who the audience is, but unfortunately, I have to assume that the audience that will be hearing this or getting this message is probably not even going to really know what the word ecology means that well. And so, which is difficult, because it's like what I was talking about before. It's the reason why I go on so many tangents is because I'm literally trying to cram thousands of ideas, systems level ideas together, and push it through this really narrow window of understanding that most people have in the very small amount of time that they will give to any particular story. And so I'm trying to get as much through that small pipe as possible. But just quickly, like, ecology is a community of living things on this planet and their interaction with each other. That's basically the crux of what an ecology is. And so every different region on the planet has a slightly differing ecology because the parameters or the environment is slightly different. So where I'm standing right now is slightly different from a farm that's 5 miles down the road, even a mile down the road. But what this sorry, Thistle, come here. My dog just got bit by a squirrel.
Oh, God.
Which is part of the ecology. This farm right here, the ecology that was here before we supplanted our cultural stories and our agricultural practices on it, or as my ancestors did, was a tallgrass prairie oak savanna. And that is it's a unique ecology in the fact that it needs human intervention to exist. The savanna is something that is like this in-between ecology. Like there's prairie, which is sustained through periodic fire and grazing, and then if you don't have that level of disturbance as fire and grazing at all, you end up with forest. Like eventually it will become forest as trees get closer and closer and they canopy out, and pretty soon there's no grasses growing under the canopy of the forest. And so to have a savanna, you needed to manage that level of burning, when it was burnt, and the amount of, the animals that came through as a consequence of the regrowth of that grass after the burning created that savanna. And the savanna is also really important because humans, in a way, evolved with savannas, even though we are a keystone species in creating those ecologies. It's like the chicken or the egg. Like, did the savannas happen before humans, or did humans happen before the savannas? But either way, like we feel at home in a savanna because we can get all of our needs met in that ecology easiest. Like we can hunt for animals, we can grow food, we can actually see quite a distance without being predated on. So it was this kind of sweet spot, ecologically speaking, for humans. And that's why every single city park anywhere in the world that you go is based on a savanna. It's basically this nice lush green grass underneath big spreading trees. So this particular ecology was a tallgrass prairie oak savanna where the main tree species was red and bur oak, and they're a beautiful, majestic tree that spreads when it's not growing in competition with a whole bunch of other trees. It spreads out probably like 60 to 70 feet in diameter, and it's just a thing of beauty. The shade that it provides, the fact that it's a massing tree, so it's raining carbohydrates from the sky every couple of years. The water here, like we're surrounded by wetlands. There was hundreds of thousands of wetlands in this region called the Prairie Pothole region because the glaciers that retreated from here 10,000 years ago left a whole bunch of, created topography, but it left a whole bunch of rock and soil here. And the succeeding ecology after the retreat of those glaciers becoming this oak and tallgrass prairie, we ended up with the kind of megafauna like the bison or the buffalo that would come through here. And there would be, I obviously wasn't here, but, we hear of herds that were hundreds of thousands of animals together, and they would come through, they would have migratory routes. They would have come through this farm maybe once every couple of years, maybe once every 5 years. But when they did, the impact of the landscape would have been huge. They would have eaten almost every bit of grass and trampled the rest down and pooped and peed everywhere and browsed on the trees and then they would leave. And that level of disruption was actually necessary for this ecology. There's disturbance and rest is actually just absolutely crucial for a healthy ecology. And if we don't disturb it enough, it's bad, and if we disturb it too much, it's bad. So it has to be that balance. But this would have been a paradise for the people that lived here before we impacted this ecology as much as we did. The water was so clear that you could see to the bottom of the lakes that were 20 feet deep. You could drink out of any water source here, that was over, 3-4 feet deep. It was just, the landscape was filled with food, filled with abundance. Like my wife Stephanie, she can walk out in these woods and she can recognize dozens and dozens of plants that are edible, medicinal plants, trees that we can eat from. I'm getting better at it, but I don't know as much as her. And she is just scratching the surface of the amount of knowledge that was lost from the Native Americans that were once here, that spent, that evolved in this landscape and with this landscape. Like a lot of the species, a lot of the trees that were really nutritionally dense for humans, we selected as humans. And so the ecology really did grow and evolve with our direct impact, our direct managing. And a lot of the tree species that we see, a lot of the berry species, like there's service berries, there's blueberries, there's blackberries, there's raspberries, there's elderberries. There's just dozens and dozens of types of berries that grow wild here. And we as Westerners think that is wild in the fact that we had no hand in it as human beings, but that's not true. Like all those species are here and able to be, and eaten from and have the fruit that they do because our ancestors selected those varieties of those species that produce the biggest fruit, the biggest nuts. And it's basically like it introduces a whole nother story to our concept of history and our concept of wild. Like we really do see the natural world as something that is separate from us and something that was here before us, but it's really not that case. It's what we see in the reality of the ecology that we live in today was directly impacted by our ancestors and continues to be.
My last question for you, because I know that we're over sort of the time that I had promised, is there something that came up today that I didn't ask you about that you'd love to talk a little bit more about?
For people like yourself that are interested enough to be asking these questions, to be asking the right questions. And it's difficult when our realities have been shaped by things out of our control, like the cultural stories that I talked about earlier. It's difficult to even comprehend or to recognize that there could be a different reality. And it's a whole other matter to try to figure out how to ask the right questions to get to a different reality. And so your job as a moderator or as a storyteller is really, really crucial and really important. And I appreciate what you're trying to do. And I just hope that there's enough people that are seeking a different way of viewing their reality and want to hear these stories. I've been thinking about storytelling a lot even before you contacted us about this project. And it really, I don't know why, but it kind of came to me only a couple weeks ago, just how much of a challenge we have in front of us in the form of calculating or communicating an alternative story, because all of the storytellers that we've had, like all of our oral traditions of storytelling, have been supplanted by these seductive and like candy type stories that is mass media or movies have been basically become our storytelling of choice in this culture. And when you think about what a movie is, it's a 2-hour snippet into a different reality. And 2 hours is not exactly a long time to be trying to explain a different reality, but it's a heck of a lot longer than most people are going to give to listening to oral histories or oral stories. But God, when you start to think about the runaway feedback loop of disconnected urbanites being the majority of the storytellers in our culture, and the stories that they're going to tell are directly impacted by the stories that they were told. And if all you've ever known is living in a city and being disconnected from source, what kind of stories or alternative stories are you going to be able to muster in your head? Like it's a failure of the past, and it's a lack of imagination on our part, because it's just so difficult as humans to imagine anything that you've never experienced in your life. So, but if they're the ones that are giving 95+% of the stories to the next generation, it's just this compounding effect. And so I don't know how to even get around it other than to somehow reach storytellers like yourself and get them to recognize that the power of their stories, what that has on the future of humanity and the planet, and that maybe they'd be telling other stories rather than just these. The majority of our stories of the culture are pretty superfluous, pretty useless in the grand scheme of things, or even worse, that they're quite dangerous. Like the stories now that are becoming more and more popular with young people about colonizing Mars is terrifying to me. Just absolutely terrifying that we are actively destroying the one planet that we have. And when all we can think about, rather than trying to think about how to stop our destruction of our own home, is to try to start thinking about how we can colonize another goddamn planet. And you know what we do with that other planet if we could actually somehow get there and create an entirely new atmosphere around that planet with the current reality that we have within our ears. We would just destroy that planet just as quickly as we did this one. Next time we talk, I would like to discuss, if we don't ever recognize that there are limits, the exponential equation just bites us in the ass every single time. And that could be right down to our everyday lives. As like I look at billionaires and think, God, how poor they are, how horrible a life that must be to never have identified what enough is for that person, and to constantly be striving for more. It's like a disease, and I think most people try to emulate rich people, but boy, that to me, they're the best example of not having the definition of what enough is for you personally, and they're just cursed by that. because they can never find true happiness because they're always striving for something else that they don't have. And as a culture, that's kind of what we're doing. We're doing the exact same thing on a broader scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it so well. It just is like there's just such a dominant. It's so clear who's telling the stories and about what that it doesn't really surprise me that so many people try to emulate that sort of life. I don't know, that's why I really like. I have to be honest, like that's why I just felt like the last time I interviewed you both, I was just like, this isn't the right way. Like I feel like only oral history can grasp at this. Like I just think that you should be telling the story, not.
No, I get it. Because like when that piece that you came out that you did through Vice News, and I watched the piece, and it was just a typical. No offense, I mean you did a good job with what you were told to do by Vice, but boy, it just looked like every other sensationalized piece where, you know, look at these activists that are going and doing something radical and breaking into these places, and you know, at least it's trying to get people to think, but it's also like this 6-minute piece.
Yeah.
And what can you actually get across in 6 minutes? It's like trying to explain, you know, really complex things to a 5-year-old with the attention span of a 5-year-old. I don't know how you do it. And then the fact that it was all doom and gloom, and then at the very end it says Vice News Extra, and then the music comes on. It's kind of happy and upbeat, and there we are. And the hour plus of interviewing that we did with you got boiled down to literally like one little snippet of probably like 30 seconds. I mean, it's better than nothing, but what I'm saying is like I don't know how that particular genre of storytelling, if it has the capacity to create the change that we need to see in this world right now. I don't think it does. If that's what consumers expect and want, it's a chicken or the egg problem again. I don't know how you, as a storyteller, can make people care enough to actually sit down and expend an hour of their time to get some in-depth story. But for the very few people that are looking for something with more substance, that's where it's really crucial for people like you to orchestrate that. So keep doing what you're doing. I think it's really important.
We'll figure it out together, but I hate that we have to take out system level conversations because pieces have to be 6 minutes. I can't, that's just not the way I can.
Yeah.
We'll fix it. We're not fix it, but we'll reimagine it.
I think there's a distinct lack of alternative stories that show what reality could be, what the world could be, what our environment could be, what our relationship to the world could be, what our relationship with each other could be. All those things, there's just a distinct lack of storytelling. There's a distinct lack of imagination.
I just think that it's such an important exercise that for some reason we're never tasked with doing. Like, we all should be reimagined. I mean, I personally think that, like, that's why I asked this question last, and I want to ask it every time, honestly, with you, because I think I never even saw the world that you did, so it's just so, I don't know, I think it's fundamental. Like, I think we need to be having conversations about, like, what is it that we want?
I've only realized this in the last year or so, how much energy I've expended in this world just trying to get people to at least pay attention to a different story, that I spend so much time trying to convince people to care that I never really spent that much time in creating an alternative story to begin with. And it's the chicken or the egg again. If you don't come up with a really wonderful story that is thought-provoking and exciting and inspiring for people, then they won't care about it in the first place. So I feel like that's what most activism today is doing, is that they're at least caring, but they're so reactive and they're trying so desperately to get people to hear an alternative message that they've never really taken the time to come up with that alternative message in the first place. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody else. So I want to work on that this winter. It's exciting to me that whatever it was that got you interested in this, I'm just excited that it did, and I'm hoping that it has legs and that you're going to continue on with it. But I'm especially interested in people that recently came to this reality, and because I want to know how it happened. I want to ask you questions the next time. What exactly was it that shifted your reality to where you are today and got you on the trajectory that you're on right now? Because whatever it was in you can that be replicated? Is there a way that we can replicate that to make it deliverable to more people and get them to start caring about this stuff too?
Yeah, just meeting you both was like at this like really pivotal point in my life where I had like started realizing the root of capitalism and all these other things, and then I meet you both and I was just like, wow. It was really special. So yes, but we should talk about it because I think you're right. I think a lot of people are dissatisfied, but they don't know why. Yeah,
and they don't know what to do with that dissatisfaction because there's no alternative being presented to them.
Exactly.
So I feel like we are in a pivotal moment in history with that level of dissatisfaction. If you can somehow tap into that and have that other reality in hand, because you're pretty much going to have to serve up a different reality on a platter for people. The most frustrating thing that I've ever experienced in this world to date is finding a person that actually says to me and nods, in agreement with everything I say, and says that they get it, and yet they don't change anything in their day-to-day life after coming to that different reality. That is the most insane frustration that I've ever felt. To me, it just shows that they're almost like sociopathic, where if they actually understand it, but they continue doing things to destroy the planet, it just shows a complete lack of capacity for care. Yeah, it's scarier than people who don't get it, I think. It is. It's terrifying. I want us to co-create this, and I think we can do it. We just have to think about how. Trying to just, be okay with whatever happens. And like today when I'm out here talking to you and having these stories, picking up firewood in my woods, even if no one ever heard these stories, it was still worth doing. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to say that we're going to only continue to have these discussions, even if it's just the two of us, only if other people are going to hear them. I agree. I guess it's similar to the old adage, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? I really agree with you. It's really an honor. Like, I can't emphasize this enough. It's so nice to find people who think like you, like Steph, and it's just special to have these conversations, even if no one hears them. That's right. All right. Well, I'm going to go and start a fire and go sit by it. Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it, and we'll talk soon. All right. Bye. Bye.